Welcome to the 70s. In 1970, Pierre Elliott Trudeau is still Prime Minister of Canada and remains Prime Minister until briefly getting beaten by Joe Clark in 1979, but is back in the Prime Minister's chair the next year, holding office until the mid-80s.
It's the end of an era in Canada, the departure of perhaps the most exciting and the most exasperating political leader this country has ever had. With me is Peter Mansbridge, and together with our CBC News colleagues, we'll be exploring the implications of the Trudeau resignation, how it happened, why, and what happens next.
Trudeau has to deal with the October crisis of 1970, when French terrorists, the Front de Libération de Québec, or FLQ, are wiring public mailboxes to explode, setting off bombs at public buildings in Montreal, such as the Stock Exchange and RCMP headquarters, and kidnapping politicians. They execute Quebec's Minister of Labour, Pierre Laporte, strangling him and leaving his body to be found in the trunk of a car. To deal with this, Trudeau declares the War Measures Act, which is like declaring martial law and suspending the rights of Canadian citizens in order to fight a war. This is a very controversial move. Armed troops are seen in Canada's major cities, mainly Montreal and Ottawa, trying to ensure no more bombings or kidnappings occur. Confronted in Ottawa by concerned journalists who wonder how far he is willing to go with this rather extreme approach, rather than give a nation-comforting, warm politician's answer, Trudeau gives a cold, terrorist, frightening answer, and instead says, "Just watch me."
A lot of bleeding hearts around who just don't like to see people with helmets and guns. All I can say is go on and bleed, but it's more important to keep law and order in this society than to be worried about weak-kneed people who don't like the looks of a social
At any
criminal.
cost? At any cost? How far would you go with that? How far would you extend that?
Well, just watch me.
The matter is soon brought to a close, and kidnapped politician James Cross is released. Although Trudeau's strategy works, it is criticized by the other political parties as wild, extreme, and unwarranted. In 1970, Edward Heath is Prime Minister of Britain and has to deal with the bombings and terrorism in Northern Ireland over British intervention and Catholic and Protestant fighting. After the Prime Ministership changes hands a couple of other times in the 70s, in 1979 Margaret Thatcher becomes Britain's first female Prime Minister.
Britain has, no doubt, its first woman Prime Minister, even though she, cautious as always, will not admit it until the figures behind me show 318, the figure that she needs. It's a historic morning for Britain, and we'll be reflecting it with news and reaction from all the way across the country.
I just thank you very much.
How do you feel at this moment?
Very excited, very aware of the responsibilities. Her Majesty, the Queen, has asked me to form a new administration, and I have accepted. It is, of course, the greatest honour that can come to any citizen in a democracy. I know full well the responsibilities that await me as I enter the door of number 10, and I'll strive unceasingly to try to fulfil the trust and confidence that the British people have placed in me and the things in which I believe.
She will work to dismantle and privatize a large number of government-funded help agencies, including programs designed to help feed the poor children of Britain, including ending the government-sponsored free lunches for poor children, earning her the nickname Thatcher the Milk Snatcher. In 1970, Richard Nixon is President of the United States of America, but has to resign over the Watergate scandal and is replaced by his Vice President Gerald Ford in 1974, who is in turn replaced by Democrat Jimmy Carter in 1977. At first, Nixon is pushing America further and further into Vietnam involvement, but in 1973 Nixon pulls America out of Vietnam. Nixon visits China and Moscow during his tenure as president, which helps start a policy of negotiation rather than suspicion and military threats when settling disputes between America and those communist countries. Instead, he declares war on cancer, drugs, and poverty. Americans love declaring war on things within America, and continues to force the southern states to desegregate the last remaining areas where blacks and whites are being segregated. The Watergate scandal, named after the Watergate building where much of it occurred, involves Americans learning that Nixon, their Republican president, and his party have been spying on and secretly tape recording the conversations and election and political strategies of the opposing Democratic Party. The fact that no one, not even the President of the United States of America, has a legal right to spy on and invade the privacy of any American citizen purely for personal reasons makes this a very serious matter. It means the President is willing to break the law to get and keep public office and manipulate his opponents. And then, as this matter is starting to come out in the public eye, rather than confessing, President Nixon clearly intends to pretend to have had nothing to do with it, to let his guys take the fall for it and keep running the country.
And I pledge to you tonight from this office that I will do everything in my power to ensure that the guilty are brought to justice and that such abuses are purged from our political processes in the years to come, long after I have left this office.
The more he is investigated by a committee formed to look into the matter, the more he tries to stall and not cooperate with the investigation.
I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
Eventually, he can't evade it any longer, and he has to resign before he is impeached, his career in politics over, having earned the nickname Tricky Dick.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office. As I recall the high hopes for America with which we began this second term, I feel a great sadness.
I am acutely aware that you have not elected me as your president by your ballots. So I ask you to confirm me as your president with your prayers.
Gerald Ford had achieved vice presidency and presidency of the United States of America without ever having been voted in. And as president, after Nixon is forced to quit, has to deal with ending the final remaining American involvement in Vietnam. In Vietnam, the communist North successfully finally take the democratic South. Ford must also deal with the energy crisis and a general economic crisis that is the worst since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Ford continues to try to keep the peace with the Soviet Union and other countries rather than threatening nuclear war.
In this outward and physical ceremony, we attest once again to the inner and spiritual strength of our nation. As my high school teacher, Miss Julia Coleman, used to say, we must adjust to changing times and still hold to unchanging principles.
Democrat Jimmy Carter becomes president in 1977 and creates two brand new cabinet positions in the federal government of America, the Department of Education and the Department of Energy. Carter is very interested in energy conservation and reducing pollution, in educating American children, and in keeping peace worldwide. His presidency will, therefore, be a short one. In 1971, the Metric Commission is formed to convert Canada from miles and gallons and pounds to kilometers, liters, and kilograms. The majority of the world uses the metric system. To this day, we still use inches, feet, and pounds for our personal measurements, but the metric system for almost everything else. This is pretty standard in the world, although the United States opted to reject the metric system entirely in the 70s. Since entering into at the last minute and saving everyone's butts in the First and Second World Wars, and after playing a central part in Korea, the myth of America being able to solve any world problem with guns, like world policemen, is shattered when the lessons of the impossible, foolhardy situation in Vietnam start to require everyone to seriously consider them. Despite this, not only is America at first reluctant to pull out of trying to single-handedly set Vietnam right and stop the threat of communism without the UN, America is secretly up to a great deal of meddling and political tweaking in other countries in the world as well. The CIA is involved in destabilizing governments which seem to be getting too socialist, even if the leaders are democratically elected, so that revolutions, in some cases now known to have been funded, trained, armed, or even manned by American operatives, can be encouraged or caused to happen. The thing is, all the revolutions end in oppressive dictatorships, including ones in Chile and Argentina, both of which revolutions were helped on their way by arms of the American government in ways the average American citizen is not aware of at this time. Controversy surrounding Americans' arming, training, and general involvement in violent uprisings around the world would continue into the 80s and 90s, with dubious situations coming to light in Panama and Iran, and the American government demonstrating a policy of keeping its citizens in the dark as to exactly what it was up to overseas. By the time America would invade Iraq under false pretenses in 2011, this kind of world policemanship and the restructuring of the governments of other countries isn't something they're even going to bother attempting to hide anymore. The disasters in the 70s are mainly economic ones, and they include the gas crisis, in which oil prices quadruple, which is even more worrying when we consider how huge, heavy, powerful, and inefficient but awesome their cars are compared to what we drive today. In Canada, the formation of Petro-Canada in 1975 is an attempt to combat this. Canadians complaining about skyrocketing gas prices joke bitterly that the company name Petro-Canada stands for Pierre Elliott Trudeau Rips Off Canada. Where the 60s seemed to bring a strong feeling of optimism, with the message that if we can live lives motivated and directed by love rather than selfishness, violence, and hate, then we can make the world a paradise. The 70s are very much like waking up Monday morning and going to work and seeing who's still the boss and what problems don't seem to be going away anytime soon. Many view Woodstock as a turning point. Besides a lot of rock fans, onlookers, and partiers, Woodstock was also a lot of hippie idealists trying to change the world into a better place, trying to do away with marriage, money, poverty, violence, greed, and war. People trying to stop the cutting down of trees, the extinction of wildlife, and pollution of the atmosphere. These people had their chance to start communes and make their own clothes, stop eating meat, get their electricity from solar power, experiment with pacifism and free love, use trade and barter instead of money, and look and dress however they like regardless of social class or gender. And suddenly, it's the 70s and no one cares. The government has been lying about how the Kennedys died, and the president, who is keeping them in Vietnam right into the 70s, who is in the driver's seat when people protesting the Vietnam involvement are tear-gassed, beaten, arrested, and shot by National Guardsmen, whose job it is to protect American citizens from harm coming from outside their country, this president has been caught lying and has had to resign. Yet it seems like business as usual with politics. The innocent experience many had enjoyed of walking around shoeless or even pantsless and high at Woodstock and never worrying about having anything stolen or being beaten up or raped or how to pay for things is followed up by violent riots at other rock festivals which demand tickets be paid for. Oh, it's all just about the money now, man. At the Altamont Festival, the Rolling Stones lived to regret a major tactical mistake in hiring the Hells Angels biker gang to work as security, and an audience member is killed in view of the stage mid-performance. In Ohio, at Kent State University in 1970, National Guardsmen are called in to deal with a Vietnam protest of the kind that is fairly routine on campuses then. Things go south, though. The Guardsmen fire 67 assault rifle rounds across the campus in just 13 seconds, and 9 students are hit, many of whom are simply going to classes and are not in any way involved in the protests. 1 student is paralyzed and 4 students are killed. Canadian-born Neil Young, working with bandmates Crosby, Stills and Nash, immediately writes, records, and releases an angry song about this.
Summer I hear the drum.
Young calls the Kent State shootings probably the biggest lesson ever learned at an American place of learning. Many radio stations banned the song, particularly in Ohio, the state where the event happened, and which is the title of the song, because it criticizes President Richard Nixon by name. To add to the list of things that make a hippie think in the 1970s, it seems that person after person has died of drug overdoses, often accompanied by psychiatric problems either caused or worsened by the drug use. Pink Floyd's founding member Syd Barrett has irreparably fried his brain and is left behind by his band to live out the rest of his days with his mother. Many others die. Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, and countless others. All dead without seeing what it's like to turn 30, nor what the 1970s would be like. John and Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X murdered and no longer with us. After a lifetime of overprescription of pills taking their toll on his internal organs, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, is found dead on his bathroom floor in Graceland, his Memphis, Tennessee mansion, presumably having fallen off his toilet. In 1980, John Lennon, the brains of the Beatles and the one with all the opinions about pacifism, politics, and non-violence, will be shot dead too, having amassed huge wealth and lived the life of a wealthy man while continuing to sell pop albums about not being greedy and not needing money and just loving everybody. What had been a new message of love, hope, and freedom in the 60s now seems like nonsense a lot of people have simply grown out of. Hippies get haircuts, put on ties and dress shoes, and start about the serious business of having families and making money. In the 60s, hippies had tried various experiments with communes, collectives, and co-ops, and there is a problem also with cults during this period. People are worried their children will join one of the many worldwide cults which seem to be springing up, and that they will lose all ties to them. Even if your children are merely living on a commune or in a cooperative neighborhood scheme, there are news stories in the 70s to make parents worry a great deal. Charles Manson had had a commune on a farm in California in the 1960s, and due to his obsessive misreading of Beatles song lyrics and his bigotry and downright insanity, he had influenced his group of young people to hate rich celebrities enough to go to film director Roman Polanski's and brutally stab to death Polanski's pregnant wife, actress Sharon Tate, and the other people who were there with her that evening in August of 1969. The Manson family wrote Pig and Helter Skelter, the title of a Beatles song, on the walls of the place in the blood of the victims. Despite Manson himself not having committed the murders personally, he is held legally responsible for causing and probably ordering them. The trials of Charles Manson and his family are huge media events in the early 70s, with Manson playing this up by carving a swastika symbol on his forehead, shaving his head, and having his followers, male and female, do the same thing and spout random nonsense. They are being tried during a brief period when death sentences have been abolished in the state of California. So Manson is still in prison to this day and seems to enjoy being seen as evil and scary.
You stand up and you take the worst fear symbol there is and say, there, now I've got your fear. Now I've got your fear. And your fear is your power, and your power is your control. I'm your king of this whole planet. I'm going to rule this whole world through Atwa. I want my trees put back. I want my water clean. I want my atmosphere cleaned up. What you do beyond that, I don't care what church you go to or what race you are, what color you are, what all that nickel and dime personal important trash head stuff. I don't care about that. All I care about is my air, my water, my trees, and my wildlife. And you humans, if you don't get in line with that, goodbye.
The state of California reinstates the death penalty shortly after Manson has already been sentenced to life in prison.
Spook people. It's spooky times. I knew Charlie Manson, so it spooked the hell out of me.
That's relative.
He wasn't what you'd call a songwriter. He was like a song spewer.
Play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about liars? Are you people going to leave us? I just beg you, please leave us. Bill, we will bother nobody. Anybody wants to get out of here can get out of here. We have no problem about getting out of here. They come and go all the time. I don't know what kind of game. People like publicity. Some people do. I don't.
Then there is the Jonestown Massacre. What had begun as a church in the 1950s under leader Jim Jones has gradually become a cult by the 1970s, with Jones controlling everything his church members do and beating and sexually exploiting and abusing members of both genders. After authority figures looking too closely into his church, Jones moves it from America to South America. When an American governor comes down and visits the church due to complaints from relatives, he and the cameraman who shot this footage are shot through the head with shotguns. Then all 900 members of the church drink poisoned Kool-Aid, something they had been practicing for some time under the direction of Jim Jones in case something like this happened. Members who refuse to drink are shot or forcibly poisoned, and children are given the poison without knowing what it is. The remains of Jim Jones himself are found on the altar at the front of the church with a bullet wound through the head.
From 1968, I have performed 5,000 abortions in my clinic in Montreal in defiance of the abortion law, which I consider to be unjust, unfair, restrictive.
In 1969, Holocaust survivor Dr. Henry Morgentaler had opened an abortion clinic in Montreal. From 1973 to 1975, Morgentaler is tried 3 times for openly admitting that he has performed abortions for at-risk pregnancies. Each time, a jury finds him innocent. In a bizarre move, the province of Quebec simply ignores the ruling of the jury, overturns the legal decision of the court, and simply puts Morgentaler in prison anyway for an 18th-month sentence. The Supreme Court of Canada upholds this action, which is literally without legal precedent. To prevent this sort of thing from happening again, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau creates the Morgentaler Amendment to the Criminal Code of Canada, making it illegal for higher courts to overturn innocent verdicts from juries. Morgentaler is already in prison at this point, so this doesn't help him. Also, in defiance of legal custom, Morgentaler is not offered parole once he's served a third of his sentence, and is only released once he's had a heart attack 10 months into his 18th-month sentence. Morgentaler is plagued by continual legal battles until 1976, when Quebec gives up trying him and having juries proclaim him innocent every time. In 1978, Louise Brown, the world's first test tube baby, is born in London, England. Test tube babies make it possible for a woman who had previously found it impossible to conceive to have an egg removed, mixed with some sperm in a petri dish, and then have the forming zygote implanted back into her hormone-treated body for a normal pregnancy and birth. It is the 1970s, when everyone is terrified of being considered a sexist or a racist, and you really start seeing the influx of minorities and females to the workforce. Suddenly, people who had never experienced this before are given a speeding ticket by a female police officer, or go to a black dentist, or are sentenced to prison by an Asian judge. In 1972, one of the most famous hockey games ever will be played. Team Canada will take on the Soviet Union's team, and it will be a long, hard game won by a desperate shot from Canadian player Paul Henderson at the last minute. Music industry professionals have been paying attention at the huge crowds that were willing to show up to Woodstock, and concerts in the 70s are the biggest anyone has ever seen. Also, unprecedented amounts of money are spent on light shows, makeup, costumes, and sets.
This is KISS, each sold separately, and you can put them in any crazy pose you want.
In addition, bands like KISS began selling dolls and garbage pails and lunchboxes and posters to a degree that's never been seen before. The use of horror movie or devil imagery in rock music has parents worried.
Experience the satisfaction of fine listening with the sounds of Sony. You'll have a happy awakening to Sony's direct dial Dream Machine, complete with AM/FM radio, Dream Bar, and sleep timer. When you're away from home, take along Sony's portable stereo cassette player recorder for big listening pleasure. And when you're on the go, enjoy music in motion with Sony's Walkman stereo sound system. Sony, the perfect gift for your one and only. These and many other fine Sony products available at Huffins Photo and Hi-Fi.
Technology that really starts to take off this decade includes the much more portable cassette tapes, which allow for easier home recording and portable music enjoyment. Briefly, there is also a format called the 8-track tape. By the end of the 70s, Sony will be selling the Sony Walkman, which allows people to carry around a tape player and radio in a form far lighter and smaller than had ever been possible before. Digital watches, light-up clock radios, and pocket calculators become commonplace. The idea that everything should be digital takes hold at this point in time. The opposite of digital is analog, by the way. And soon home computers and digital components in almost anything with an on button will be seen by the 80s and 90s. In fact, in 1976, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne start the Apple Company to sell the Apple personal computer kit Wozniak and Jobs have made. The Beatles already have a company called Apple, which mainly deals with music, so Jobs, Wozniak, and Wayne have to promise that their Apple company is just about computers and will never make a cent from anything involving music. The Apple computer is built into a wooden project case, is named after the apple that supposedly inspired Sir Isaac Newton to postulate gravity, and costs $666.66. The guts of the computer kits are hand-built personally by Steve Wozniak in the garage and sold to people who will then have to assemble them themselves. Soldering and buying additional power supplies and electronic components is involved. To be able to afford designing and building it in a garage, Jobs had sold his Volkswagen van and Wozniak had sold his $500 pocket calculator. The Apple computer does not have graphics, color, or sound, and uses a television set for a monitor, because of course its picture resolution, its low-def detail, is much, much less than that of a 70s television. There is no mouse. Lacking any graphics as it does, the Apple displays text only, with one font and only uppercase. It displays 40 by 24 characters on a full screen. That's 40 by 24 letters, symbols, or numbers on one screen, not pixels or picture elements like our current 1280 by 768 pixel computer screens. The Apple has 4K of RAM unless you upgrade it to 8. There is no disk drive or hard drive or any form of storage media, so every time you turn the Apple on, you first have to spend hours typing in the alphanumeric coding making the program you are going to use before you can use it. So if you wanted to use Microsoft Word, you would have to write Microsoft Word. Then you can, for instance, play text-only chess, but when you turn the computer off, all of this will be lost and will need to be retyped the next time you want to use the computer to play chess. Some computer fans design a way to hook up a cassette tape recorder to the Apple, causing the typed-in code to be translated into screeching sounds recorded on the cassette tape, so that when the computer is turned back on again, the screeching sounds can be played back into it, saving a whole lot of typing time. What would take 3 or 4 hours to type might only take 15 or 20 minutes to load from a cassette tape. At this point in time, Apple is fine with just about anybody making extra stuff to use with their stuff.
From High Technology, the computer store, introducing Apple II, the easy-to-operate home computer. Just hook it up to your TV to create dazzling color displays. Or you can balance your checkbook. Kids can teach themselves arithmetic. Or the family can invent their own Pong games. The possibilities are endless. It's called Apple II, the personal computer. See it at High Technology, the computer store.
A quite successful, entirely pre-built for you Apple II home computer comes out in 1977. The wooden prototype is retroactively renamed the Apple I. The Apple II can make simple beeping sounds, can make a 40 by 24 grid of Lego-like colored squares or pixels in 6 different colors if you include white, that's full signal, and black, no signal, to that pixel. All computers can do black, even ones that won't turn on. The Apple II can be fitted with a disk drive, with disks that hold just over 1 meg of information. There aren't any MP3s back then, of course, because no computer has good enough sound to play anything but beeps, but one of those disks would have been large enough to hold one MP3 song, which was well under 1 minute in length. The Apple II costs $1,298 with 4K of RAM and no color graphics, or $2,638 if you want it to be able to do red, green, blue, and magenta in addition to the black and white, and if you actually need 48K of RAM. The $2,638 does not, of course, include a monitor or a cassette or disk drive. The Apple logo has a rainbow at this point to advertise that it can do color. Naturally, there is money to be made in electronics in ways other than trying to sell home computers to people. By 1972, the American company Atari had already started putting coin-operated Pong machines in bars. When Japan gets into the action in 1978 with Space Invaders and Atari counters with Asteroids, as well as making a home video gaming console simply called the Atari in 1977, the video game craze of the 80s is ready to start. By the 1970s, pretty much all television programs are broadcast in color, though the sound is still mono. The wealthier people can afford a color television.
Prime time 77-78 on CBS.
I got the part! Oh, Joy! Wonderful! You got the part! You got the part! Oh, part!
$7.99 from K-Tel. Tapes $9.99.
He went up the factory. He was in!
Share the dreams and disappointments, the successes and dilemmas of a modern American family, the Fitzpatricks.
Agree is different than some shampoos. With Agree, hair stays clean longer. It cleans deep down on the scalp where the greases begin.
Just washed your hair?
Didn't need to.
Use Agree shampoo. Don't get caught with the greases.
For millions of years, Earth was fertile and rich. Then pollution and waste began to take their toll. Civilization fell into ruin. This is the world of the 25th century. Only a handful of scientists remain, men who have vowed to rebuild what has been destroyed. This is their achievement. Ark 2, a mobile storehouse of scientific knowledge, manned by a highly trained crew of young people.
Get that do it up feeling, do it up.
Two great names in jeans do it up in style. With an...
In 1977, in a time when science fiction movies had very simple and unconvincing special effects, George Lucas uses firecrackers to blow up plastic battleship model parts and makes Star Wars, which delights the children of the generation.
Luke Skywalker was just a farm boy until he received a mysterious message from a princess.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
She's beautiful.
Star Wars, starring Mark Hamill.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?
Harrison Ford.
Boring conversation anyway. Luke, we're gonna get company! I think we took a wrong turn.
Carrie Fisher.
Good luck.
Alec Guinness.
You can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
20th Century Fox presents the most extraordinary motion picture of all time, Star Wars.
Here's where the fun begins.
No legendary adventure of the past could be as exciting as this romance of the future.
Here they come.
May the Force be with you in Star Wars.